Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper, where forgotten civilizations, unexplained wonders, and ancient secrets come back to life. Ready to unravel the mystery? Let's begin the journey. For centuries, legends spoke of a lost white city, a fabulous metropolis of gold hidden deep in the impenetrable jungles of Honduras. It was dismissed as a myth, a lost city of the monkey god. But in the 21st century, a team using revolutionary technology flew over the jungle and found something incredible hidden beneath the dense canopy: the ghostly ruins of a real lost city. There are few things that capture the human imagination quite like the idea of a lost city. It's a powerful and enduring fantasy, a story that has been told in countless myths and adventure novels. The idea that somewhere, hidden from the modern world, a forgotten metropolis lies waiting to be discovered, its treasures and secrets intact, is an almost irresistible lure. We dream of finding Atlantis beneath the waves, or El Dorado in the mountains of South America. For centuries, these stories were seen as little more than romantic fictions, tales for dreamers and adventurers. But our story today is about a lost city that turned out to be real. It is the story of a legend that haunted explorers for 500 years, a legend of a white city of fabulous wealth, hidden deep in one of the most remote and dangerous jungles on Earth. This is the story of the search for the legendary Ciudad Blanca, a quest that would lead from the wild ambitions of the Spanish conquistadors to the daredevil explorers of the 20th century, and finally, to a revolutionary new technology that would allow us to see through the impenetrable jungle canopy and reveal a secret that the forest had kept for half a millennium. The legend of the White City begins in the 16th century, in the chaotic and violent aftermath of the Spanish conquest of the Americas. The Spanish conquistadors, led by men like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro, had toppled the mighty Aztec and Inca empires, and in the process, they had seized unimaginable quantities of gold and silver. These discoveries fueled a kind of gold fever throughout the Spanish colonies. The conquistadors became obsessed with finding the next great source of treasure, the next forgotten kingdom filled with gold. They began to listen intently to the local legends and rumors told by the indigenous peoples they had conquered. And in the region of what is now Honduras and Nicaragua, they began to hear whispers of a place deep within the jungle, a city so wealthy that its buildings were said to be made of white stone that gleamed like silver in the sun. This was the first iteration of the legend, La Ciudad Blanca, the White City. In 1526, Hernán Cortés himself, the conqueror of Mexico, was on a brutal march through the jungles of Honduras. He wrote a letter back to the Emperor Charles V of Spain, in which he reported hearing trustworthy news of a province in the region that was exceedingly rich. He said he had heard of great lords who ruled over cities that were as magnificent as his own capital in Mexico. He was so intrigued by these rumors that he dispatched one of his captains to investigate, though nothing ever came of it. A couple of decades later, in 1544, a Spanish bishop named Cristobal de Pedraza wrote another letter to the emperor. He described a journey he had taken into the jungles of the Mezquitia region of Honduras, a vast, unexplored wilderness. He claimed to have stood on a high mountain and looked down into a valley, where he saw a large and prosperous city. The people of this city, he was told by his native guides, ate from plates of pure gold. These early, tantalizing reports from the Spanish were the seeds from which the legend would grow. They established the basic elements of the story: a great, wealthy city, hidden deep in the Mezquitia jungle, a place of fabulous, untold riches. As the centuries passed, the legend evolved and took on new, more mythical dimensions. It became intertwined with local, indigenous folklore. The White City became associated with a strange and terrifying local deity. The legend began to speak of the city of the monkey god. The story told of a giant, monolithic statue of a simian-like creature that stood at the heart of the city. Some versions of the myth claimed that strange half-human, half-monkey ape-men still lived in the ruins, guarding the city's treasures. Other stories told of a terrible curse, a curse of the monkey god, that would befall anyone who dared to enter the sacred city or try to steal its gold. They would be struck down by a mysterious wasting disease. The legend of the White City was now more than just a story of lost gold. It was a full-blown adventure tale, complete with the lost city, a strange jungle god, and a deadly curse. It had become the Central American El Dorado, a perfect target for the dreamers, obsessives, and adventurers of the modern age. For the next 400 years, the White City remained just a legend. The La Mesquita rainforest, the supposed location of the city, was one of the last truly unexplored places on Earth. It is a vast, mountainous, and incredibly dense jungle, a triple canopy rainforest where the trees are so thick that sunlight barely reaches the ground. It is a land of torrential rains, impassable swamps, venomous snakes, hungry jaguars, and tropical diseases for which there is no cure. It is a place that does not welcome outsiders. Navigating it on foot is a nightmare. Numerous local prospectors and adventurers likely tried to find the lost city over the centuries, but the jungle was too formidable. Most who entered it were never seen again. Their stories and their lives, swallowed by the immense green wilderness. The city, if it existed at all, was protected by the most effective fortress in the world: nature itself. It wasn't until the 20th century, with the advent of modern exploration and a new spirit of adventure, that the search for the White City began in earnest. The legend captured the imagination of a new generation of explorers. In the 1920s and 30s, aviators like Charles Lindbergh flew over the Mesquita region and reported seeing what they thought might be the ruins of ancient cities below. The New York-based Museum of the American Indian sponsored several expeditions into the jungle, finding some intriguing artifacts but never the city itself. But the most famous and most enigmatic of these early 20th century explorers was a man named Theodore Mord. Mord was a classic American adventurer, a real-life Indiana Jones. He was a journalist, a spy, and an explorer who had traveled the world. In 1940, sponsored by the wealthy heir to the High Foundation, George Gustav High, Mord set off into the Mesquita jungle with a single companion, on a secret mission to find the lost city of the monkey god. For months there was no word from him. He was presumed lost to the jungle. But then, 5 months later, he emerged, emaciated and suffering from malaria, but triumphant. He returned to the United States with thousands of artifacts, stone tools, sculptures, and other items that he claimed to have taken from the lost city. He gave a sensational interview to the newspapers, describing his discovery in vivid detail. He said he had been led by his local guides deep into the jungle to a walled city. He described seeing the remnants of great buildings and a large pyramid, in the center of which was the giant statue of a monkey-like deity, a statue that the local people worshipped. He claimed the city was vast and that the stories of gold were likely true, though he had not found any himself. Mord's story caused a sensation. It seemed that the legend was true. The city of the monkey god had been found. But then the story took a dark and mysterious turn. Mord refused to reveal the exact location of the city. He was terrified that if he did, the site would be looted and destroyed by treasure hunters. He claimed he would only lead a proper scientific expedition back to the site. But the outbreak of World War II put a stop to any such plans. Mord went on to work in military intelligence during the war. He never returned to Honduras, and in 1954, he tragically took his own life, dying under mysterious circumstances without ever revealing the location of his incredible discovery. He took the secret of the White City to his grave. Mord's story added another layer of romance and tragedy to the legend. Did he really find the city, or was he a charismatic fraud who had simply bought the artifacts from local villagers? No one knew for sure. For the next 60 years, the search for the White City continued, but it was a frustrating and often fruitless endeavor. Other explorers and documentary film crews plunged into the jungle, following Mord's supposed path, But they all came back empty-handed. The jungle was still too thick, too vast, too dangerous. The White City, it seemed, was determined to keep its secrets. It appeared that a ground-based search was simply not feasible. The only way to find the city would be to see it from above. But even aerial photography was of limited use. The jungle canopy was so dense that it formed a solid, unbroken sea of green, completely obscuring the ground below. A new approach was needed. A new technology was needed. And that brings us to the final chapter in the long search for the White City, a chapter that begins in the 21st century. A team of documentary filmmakers and archaeologists, led by an explorer named Steve Elkins, decided to tackle the problem with a revolutionary new tool. This technology was called LiDAR, which stands for Light Detection and Ranging. LiDAR is, in essence, a form of laser-based radar. The technology had been developed by NASA to map the surface of other planets, like Mars. The team decided to apply this same technology to the jungles of Honduras. The idea was to mount a highly advanced LiDAR scanner onto a small airplane. The plane would then fly back and forth over the target area in the Mesquite jungle, in a precise grid pattern. As it flew, the LiDAR instrument would fire billions of laser pulses down towards the ground. Most of these laser pulses would simply bounce off the top of the dense jungle canopy. But a tiny fraction of them, a few pulses out of every 1,000, would find their way through the small gaps in the leaves and branches, hit the jungle floor, and then bounce back up to the sensor on the plane. The instrument would then measure the precise time it took for each of these successful pulses to make the round trip. By doing this billions of times, and by using powerful computers to process the immense amount of data, the team could essentially erase the jungle. The computer program could filter out all the laser returns that had bounced off the trees and leaves, leaving behind only the returns that had bounced off the solid ground. The result would be a bare earth 3D digital map of the topography of the jungle floor, as if the entire forest had been clear-cut. It was a way of making the invisible visible. It was a technological gamble of epic proportions. It was expensive, it was unproven in this kind of environment, and there was no guarantee they would find anything. But it was the last best hope of solving the 500-year-old mystery. In 2012, the project was launched. A small Cessna Skymaster, equipped with a state-of-the-art LiDAR scanner, took to the skies above the Mesquite jungle. For days it flew its precise grid patterns over a remote, unexplored valley. A valley that was so deep and rugged that it was known locally as the target. After the flights were complete, the massive amount of data was sent to a team of engineers at the University of Houston for processing. The entire team waited with bated breath. Had they just spent millions of dollars to map an empty piece of jungle? Or would the legend finally be revealed? When the first processed images came back, the team was in stunned disbelief. The gamble had paid off, beyond their wildest dreams. There, on their computer screens in the ghostly black-and-white digital elevation map, was a city. It was not a vague shape or an ambiguous anomaly. It was the clear, unmistakable, and geometrically precise outline of a large ancient urban center. The legend of the White City was no longer a legend. It was a digital reality. The search was over. The city had been found. The moment the first LiDAR images came back from the processing lab, everything changed. For 500 years, the White City had been a ghost, a whisper in the jungle, a legend passed down from conquistadors to explorers. It was a story fueled by rumor, hope, and the tragic, enigmatic account of Theodore Mord. But now, in the cool digital glow of a computer screen, the ghost had taken form. The legend had become data. The discovery of the city's digital footprint was a monumental achievement, a triumph of 21st-century technology over one of the planet's most impenetrable wildernesses. But a digital image is not a city. A map is not a territory. The team knew that the next and most dangerous chapter of their quest was about to begin. They had to go there. They had to leave the world of lasers and computers behind and venture on foot into the remote, uncharted valley to see if the city on their screens was real. This is the story of how the digital ghost was made flesh, the story of the first human contact with a lost city that had been sleeping undisturbed for half a millennium. The digital discovery itself was a moment of pure, unadulterated revelation. As the team of engineers and archaeologists pored over the LiDAR data, they were looking at a landscape that no human had seen in centuries. The technology had, in effect, given them a superpower: the ability to see through the dense triple canopy rainforest as if it were glass. And what they saw was breathtaking. There, nestled in a pristine circular valley, carved by a river, were not just a few scattered mounds, but the unmistakable features of a large and highly organized urban center. The LiDAR map revealed a city that had been meticulously planned and engineered to fit its jungle environment. They could clearly see large, rectangular plazas, the open public spaces that would have been the heart of the city's ceremonial life. They could trace the outlines of what were clearly large, man-made structures, including several pyramidal mounds, their sharp geometric shapes a stark contrast to the natural contours of the surrounding hills. The scale of the settlement was far larger than they had dared to hope. It wasn't just a small village. It was a city that stretched for more than a mile through the valley. The LiDAR data showed evidence of complex public works. They could see what appeared to be an extensive network of canals and reservoirs, a sophisticated water management system that would have been essential for supporting a large population in a region with distinct wet and dry seasons. They could see terraced hillsides, evidence of large-scale agriculture, where the city's inhabitants had carved farms out of the jungle's slopes. They could even see what looked like a ball court, a feature common to many Mesoamerican civilizations, where a sacred and often deadly ritual ball game was played. And connecting it all were causeways and roads, pathways that linked the different parts of the city together. What the LiDAR revealed was not just a ruin. It was the complete blueprint of a forgotten civilization. It was a society with a complex social structure, with advanced engineering skills, and with the ability to organize a massive labor force to reshape their environment. They had found the lost city. They had even given it a code name, based on the valley where it was located, Target 1, or T1. But the digital discovery also came with a profound sense of responsibility and urgency. The location of T1 was a closely guarded secret. The team knew that if the coordinates were ever leaked, the site would be descended upon by looters and treasure hunters, who would destroy the priceless archaeological context in their search for gold. The city had been protected by the jungle for 500 years, but now that its location was known, it was more vulnerable than ever. The team knew they had to get there first. They had to mount a ground expedition to verify the LiDAR data, to study the site, and to document its treasures before they could be lost forever. And so, the planning for one of the most complex and dangerous archaeological expeditions of recent times began. The challenges were immense. The T1 Valley was located in the heart of the Mesquite rainforest, a region so remote and untouched that it is often referred to as the Amazon of Central America. There are no roads, no towns, no landing strips. The jungle floor is a treacherous landscape of swamps, steep ravines, and rivers filled with crocodiles. The area is home to some of the most venomous snakes in the world, including the deadly fer-de-lance, a snake whose bite can be fatal within minutes. It is a world of jaguars, pumas, and biting insects that carry a host of tropical diseases like malaria, dengue fever, and leishmaniasis, a flesh-eating parasite. The expedition would have to be completely self-sufficient, and the team would have to be prepared for any and all of these dangers. The Honduran government, recognizing the immense historical significance of the discovery, provided its full support. They declared the site a National Archaeological Preserve and offered to provide the expedition with a military escort. In early 2015, the team was finally ready. A hand-picked group of American and Honduran archaeologists, a documentary film crew, survival experts, and a platoon of Honduran Special Forces soldiers gathered at a remote military outpost. Their only way into the valley was by helicopter. They boarded 3 old Vietnam-era Huey helicopters, their gear packed around them, and took off. As they flew over the vast, unbroken canopy of the Mesquite jungle, the reality of their mission set in. For miles in every direction, there was nothing but an endless sea of green, a world that had remained outside of time. They were flying into a blank spot on the map, guided only by a set of GPS coordinates generated by a laser. The landing was a perilous operation in itself. There was no clearing large enough for the helicopters to land. The pilots had to hover precariously just above the treetops while the team rappelled down ropes, one by one, into the dense undergrowth below. As the last man touched the ground and the roar of the helicopter blades faded away, a profound silence descended, broken only by the chirping of insects and the distant calls of birds. They were there. They were the first human beings to set foot in this valley, to stand in this lost city, in at least 500 years. The air was thick and humid, heavy with the smell of damp earth and decaying vegetation. The jungle was all-encompassing, a green cathedral that blocked out the sky. And now the real work began. They had to find the city that they knew was all around them. Guided by their handheld GPS units, which were loaded with the LiDAR map, the team began to hack their way through the dense jungle. It was slow, exhausting work. Every foot of progress had to be won with a machete. For the first hour, they saw nothing but an impenetrable wall of green. A sense of doubt began to creep in. Was it possible the LiDAR was wrong? Had they come all this way for nothing? And then one of the archaeologists, a man named Chris Fisher, called out. He had found something. The team gathered around. There, half buried under a thick carpet of moss and leaves, was a straight line of cut stones. It was the corner of a foundation. It was the first tangible proof. The city was real. As they began to clear away the vegetation, the ruins of the city slowly began to emerge from the jungle floor, exactly where the LiDAR map had predicted they would be. It was a ghostly and awe-inspiring sight. They found themselves standing at the base of a large earthen pyramid, its sides now covered with a thick tangle of trees and roots, but its man-made rectangular shape still clearly visible. They paced out the dimensions of a large central plaza, a vast open space that would have once been the ceremonial heart of the city. They found the remains of other, smaller mounds, the foundations of the houses and public buildings that had once surrounded the plaza. They discovered a complex system of earthworks, berms, and channels that confirmed the presence of the water management system they had seen in the LiDAR data. They were walking through the skeletal remains of a city that had been swallowed whole by the jungle. The sense of discovery was electric, but it was also deeply humbling. They were intruders in a sacred and forgotten place. The jungle had claimed the city so completely that it felt less like an archaeological site and more like a natural part of the forest. The roots of giant trees grew through the stone foundations, their massive trunks rising from the tops of the pyramids. A thick layer of humus, half a millennium's worth of rotted leaves and vegetation, covered everything. The archaeologists had to use their trowels to gently scrape away this layer to reveal the stone structures beneath. Every new discovery, every uncovered foundation stone, was a victory against the relentless power of the jungle. They were, in effect, rediscovering the city 1 square foot at a time. But the most incredible discovery was yet to come. As the team was exploring the base of the largest pyramid, one of the team members noticed something sticking out of the ground. It was a stone object, and it was clearly man-made. As they began to gently excavate the area, they realized they had stumbled upon something extraordinary. It was not just one object but a huge cache of them. In a small concentrated area at the foot of the pyramid, they found over 500 beautifully carved stone artifacts, all clustered together. And most remarkably, they were not broken or scattered. They were complete and seemingly untouched, sitting right on the surface of the ancient plaza floor. covered only by a thin layer of soil. This was a discovery beyond their wildest dreams. It is incredibly rare for archaeologists to find a cache of artifacts that has not been looted or disturbed. But this one was pristine. It was as if the city's inhabitants had left them there one day and had simply walked away, never to return. The objects themselves were stunning. They were ceremonial artifacts of the highest quality. There were dozens of elaborately carved stone vessels, decorated with images of serpents and vultures. There were ceremonial thrones, or metates, carved from a single piece of stone in the shape of animal figures. And then there was the most iconic and mysterious object of all. It was the head of a statue, a sculpture that seemed to be caught in a moment of transformation. It was part human and part jaguar. Its face contorted into a snarl, its fangs bared. It was a jaguar, a powerful supernatural being that is a common figure in the mythologies of many Mesoamerican cultures. This was perhaps a representation of the city's own version of the monkey god. From the legend, a powerful and fearsome deity. The discovery of this untouched offering, which the team nicknamed the Cache of the Jaguar, was the ultimate proof. They had not only found the city's architecture, they had found its art, its religion, its soul. They had found a sacred offering, left behind at the foot of a pyramid, a final desperate plea to the gods from a people on the verge of disappearing. The team spent the next several days documenting, photographing, and 3D scanning every artifact in the cache. They made the difficult but correct archaeological decision not to remove the objects. The cache was too important and too fragile to be excavated without a proper long-term plan. They carefully reburied the artifacts, marking their location, to protect them until a future expedition could return. Their mission was complete. They had found the White City. They had walked its plazas, they had stood on its pyramids, and they had touched its sacred treasures. They had proven that the legend that had haunted explorers for 500 years was true. But in doing so, they had raised an even deeper and more profound mystery. The city was real. But what had happened to the people who built it? Why did they leave their most precious objects behind and simply vanish into the jungle, leaving their magnificent city to be consumed by the forest for all time? The discovery of the city was the end of one quest, but it was the beginning of a new one. The ground expedition to the lost city in the Mesquite jungle was a resounding success. The team had accomplished what centuries of explorers had only dreamed of. They had followed the digital breadcrumbs left by the LiDAR technology and had confirmed, with their own eyes, that the legend of a white city was not a legend at all. They had walked through its plazas, stood at the foot of its pyramids, and uncovered a treasure trove of pristine artifacts. They had found a lost civilization. But in the thrill of this incredible discovery, a new and far more profound mystery began to emerge. A mystery that was quieter, darker, and much more difficult to solve. It was the question of what had happened to the people who built this magnificent city. The ruins were strangely empty, eerily silent. There were no signs of a great battle, no evidence of a city sacked by invaders. It was as if the inhabitants had simply vanished, leaving their world behind to be swallowed by the jungle. This is the final and most haunting part of the story, the mystery of the city's sudden disappearance, a mystery that would lead the researchers back to the oldest and darkest part of the legend, the curse of the monkey god. The most stunning and perplexing clue to the city's demise was the very treasure that had caused so much excitement, the untouched cache of artifacts found at the base of the central pyramid. This discovery, the cache of the jaguar, was an archaeologist's dream, but it was also a profound puzzle. The cache consisted of over 500 beautifully carved stone objects, all clustered together in a small, well-defined area. There were ceremonial seats or metates, carved in the shape of vultures and other animals. There were elegant vessels like alabaster jars that may have been used to hold offerings. And at the center of it all was the snarling, transformative face of the jaguar, a powerful and fearsome supernatural being. The craftsmanship was exquisite, and the objects were clearly of immense ceremonial and spiritual importance. But the strangest thing about them was not what they were, but how they were found. They were not carefully buried in a tomb or hidden away in a secret chamber. They were sitting right on the surface of what was once the city's main plaza, at the foot of its most important pyramid. They were arranged in a neat and deliberate pile, and they were all completely intact. The site had not been looted. This is incredibly rare in the world of archaeology. Most ancient sites have been picked over by subsequent generations by rival cultures or, in modern times, by treasure hunters. But this place was pristine. It was a perfect frozen moment in time. The archaeologists realized they were looking at a terminal deposit, a final ritual offering left by a people at the very end of their story. It was as if, in a moment of ultimate crisis, the last inhabitants of the city had gathered their most sacred objects, placed them together at the foot of their pyramid as a massive, desperate offering to their gods, and then had simply walked away from their city forever. This scene of sudden abandonment immediately ruled out one of the most common reasons for a city's collapse: warfare. There were no signs of a great battle. The artifacts were not smashed. The buildings were not burned. There were no mass graves filled with the bodies of warriors. The city had not been conquered or destroyed by a rival power. The people had left of their own accord. But why? Why would an entire population abandon a city that they had spent centuries building? Why would they leave behind their most precious and sacred ceremonial objects, the very heart of their religious life? The cache was not just a collection of artifacts. It was a question carved in stone. It spoke of a people facing a catastrophe so profound, so overwhelming, that their only response was to make one last, great appeal to the supernatural, and then to flee, leaving everything behind. The mystery of the White City was no longer about finding it. It was about understanding why it was empty. This is where the story circles back to the oldest and most mythic element of the legend: the curse of the monkey god. For centuries, the legend had warned that any who dared to enter the sacred city would be struck down by a mysterious and deadly illness. The early explorers like Theodore Mord had taken these stories seriously, and many of the modern expedition members had spoken, half-jokingly, about the possibility of a curse. But as the archaeologists stood in the silent, empty plaza, they began to wonder if the curse was not a supernatural phenomenon, but a distorted folk memory of a real historical event. Perhaps the city was not cursed in a magical sense. Perhaps it had been hit by a plague. The leading theory that began to form among the researchers was that the sudden and complete collapse of this unknown civilization was the result of disease. Not a curse from a jungle god, but a biological catastrophe brought on by the arrival of Europeans in the New World. The year is 1492. Christopher Columbus makes landfall in the Americas. This moment marks the beginning of what is known as the Columbian Exchange, the vast transfer of plants, animals, culture, technology, and ideas between the Old World, Europe, Asia, Africa, and the New World. But the most devastating part of this exchange was the unintentional transfer of infectious diseases. The peoples of the Americas, who had been living in relative isolation for at least 15,000 years, had no immunity to the host of diseases that had been ravaging Europe, Asia, and Africa for centuries. Diseases like smallpox, measles, influenza, and bubonic plague, which were common and often survivable childhood illnesses in the Old World, were completely alien to the immune systems of the indigenous peoples of the Americas. When the Europeans arrived, they brought these invisible killers with them. The result was the single greatest demographic catastrophe in human history. The diseases spread from the coastlines inland, often moving much faster than the Europeans themselves, passed from one native community to the next through trade routes and social contact. Smallpox, in particular, was a terrifyingly efficient killer. It would sweep through a village like a wildfire, killing up to 90% of the population within a matter of weeks. It was an apocalypse. Entire cultures were wiped out. Great cities were reduced to ghost towns. And it all happened with shocking speed. A thriving community could be reduced to a handful of traumatized survivors in a single generation. The archaeologists on the White City expedition began to see a chillingly plausible scenario. The civilization in the Mesquite Valley, though isolated by the jungle, was not entirely cut off from the rest of the world. They were part of a larger network of Mesoamerican cultures. They likely traded with their neighbors. Sometime in the early 16th century, a European disease like smallpox or measles would have made its way into this network. It would have passed from one village to the next, a silent, invisible wave of death, moving deep into the interior of the jungle. When the plague finally reached the city in the T1 Valley, the results would have been devastating. The people would have had no immunity and no understanding of what was happening to them. They would have seen their friends and family dying in agony around them, their bodies covered in sores. Their own traditional medicine would have been useless. In the face of such a terrifying and inexplicable plague, their worldview would have been shattered. They would have seen it as a punishment from the gods, a sign that they had lost their divine favor. The social order would have collapsed. There would have been too many dead to bury. There would not have been enough healthy people left to farm the fields or maintain the city. The jungle, always waiting at the edges of their civilization, would have started to reclaim their fields and plazas. In this moment of ultimate crisis, it is easy to imagine the few remaining survivors, the priests and the leaders, performing one last desperate ceremony. They would gather the most sacred objects from their temples, the stone effigies of their gods, and place them in a great pile at the base of their pyramid. It would have been a final offering, a plea for the gods to stop the dying. And when the gods did not answer, and the plague continued its relentless march, the last survivors would have made the only decision they could. They would have fled, abandoning their homes, their temples, and the ghosts of their dead, and disappearing into the surrounding jungle, hoping to escape the curse that had fallen upon their city. This theory provides a powerful and scientifically plausible explanation for everything the team found. It explains the sudden abandonment of the city. It explains the pristine, untouched nature of the artifact cache, left as a final offering. And it provides a rational explanation for the legend of the curse of the monkey god. The curse was real, but it wasn't supernatural. It was biological. The folk memory of a city destroyed by a terrible, inexplicable disease was passed down through the generations by the few survivors and their neighbors, eventually transforming into the myth of a cursed city, guarded by a vengeful deity. The theory is a tragic one. It suggests that this lost civilization was not defeated by a rival army, but was an indirect victim of the European conquest, a casualty of a biological holocaust that they never saw coming. They were a people who died not because of what they did, but simply because of when and where they lived. As the expedition team was preparing to leave the valley, this theory took on a terrifyingly personal dimension. Several members of the team began to develop a strange and persistent illness. They developed sores on their faces and arms, lesions that would not heal. Upon returning to civilization, they were diagnosed with leishmaniasis, a nasty parasitic disease that is transmitted by the bite of a sandfly. The parasite slowly eats away at the flesh, and if left untreated, it can be fatal. The irony was profound. The modern-day explorers who had come to solve the mystery of the curse of the monkey god had, in a sense, contracted it themselves. They had been bitten by the jungle. The experience gave them a small but visceral taste of the kind of invisible biological dangers that the ancient inhabitants of the city would have faced. While leishmaniasis is treatable with modern medicine, it was a powerful reminder that the jungle itself is a formidable and dangerous force, and that disease has always been one of the greatest threats to human life within it. In the end, the story of the White City's disappearance is a cautionary tale. It is a story of how a vibrant and complex civilization can vanish from the face of the earth, leaving behind only ghostly ruins and a fragmented legend. The discovery of the city is a triumph of modern technology and human curiosity, but the mystery of its end is a solemn reminder of one of the darkest chapters in human history. The empty plazas and the silent pyramids of the lost city are a monument not only to the ingenuity of the people who built them, but also to the fragility of civilization in the face of disease. The curse of the monkey god was, in all likelihood, the curse of contact, the devastating, unintended consequence of two worlds colliding. And the final tragic secret of the White City is that its people were not destroyed by a mythical monster, but by an invisible one, a killer that came from half a world away and erased their entire civilization from the pages of history. The discovery of the White City is a story of how modern technology can reveal the secrets of the ancient past. It is proof that even in the 21st century, there are still lost civilizations waiting to be found. The city's sudden end is a tragic reminder of the devastating impact of disease, a curse that erased an entire culture from the pages of history. If the past still whispers to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Ancient Relics Keeper, because some mysteries were never meant to be buried.